Hello, welcome to yesterday's airlines. I'm feeling a little bit playful today, so I thought that I would take a closer look at the Gemini Jet's release photos for the May announcements and see if that impacts the scoring that I did on those May announcements a few weeks ago. Because one of the things that's difficult when I do my ranking videos is to know exactly what the releases will look like when they announced. And with some other brands, like Gemini, this becomes an especial problem because some brands are reliable. You know that when they announce a model, you know what mold they're going to use. You know they're not going to produce any major printing problems. You know roughly what the model's going to look like. It makes it much easier to rank. And some brands are a little bit less reliable, shall we say. There could be major QC issues, like often recently with Aero Classics, or there can be big print problems that have somehow got out of the factory, or you might not be certain which mold they're going to be using. So it's not always the case that I can predict the models correctly with my rankings, and sometimes I look back and I go, oh blimey, I wish I hadn't said that because that model really didn't turn out as well. But then again, sometimes it's the other way around and they turn out better. Now, since Gemini have just released the actual images of the models this month, I think is very illustrative of that issue, and I was going to quickly have a look through those and see whether it changes my rankings at all. It definitely does. So I'm not planning on doing this every month. This is merely a bit of fun, I guess, to show the issues that come when you try and guess what it is going to get produced. Now on the screen you can see what predictions I made for these models. I had 4 models sitting in supersonic for the May announcements. It was what I considered to be a pretty good month from Gemini. So sitting in the supersonic area, we had the Horizon, Alaska Airlines, Washington State, Embraer 175, we had the Copa Max 9, we had the Lufthansa 747-400, and we had the Eastern Express Bar Harbor Saab 340. And then we also had 4 sitting in the high flyer area. We had the Air France 777-300, we had one of the Air India A350s, the ITA Airways A350 Neo, and that Mexican Police 727. And there were only 2 sitting in workhorse. One of those Air India A350s because they're flaps up and flaps down, and the Delta 767-400 because I really don't rate that mold at all. And there was just one gas guzzler, and that was the S7 Neo, partly because the mold is awful and partly because I don't really appreciate Gemini producing Russian aircraft that have been made after the start of the Ukraine war. I think it is a little bit morally suspect myself. So let's get into it and have a look at the pictures of some of these. We'll start with the Alaska Horizon. And the picture looks good. The mold does have some failings. It's got these chunky pylons and, we've talked about these things before. But overall, it looks good. It looks like they've done a decent job on the finish here. No real problems with that one. Quite happy to keep her sitting in supersonic. I think that is a good little release. Could be better. They could add aerials, which they haven't done. Yeah, I think it matches. You knew it wasn't going to come with aerials. You broadly understand the failings of the mold, but it's okay, and no one else has got that mold anyway. So that one looks pretty good to me. Next up, it's the Copa, and again, I think this one is looking really good as well. I like their Max 9 mold. I've said this many times before. Broadly, it looks pretty decent. Are the logo titles a little bit lightly coloured? Not sure, but wouldn't stop me from getting it. It looks like a good release. Likewise, the Eastern Express Bar Harbor Saab 340 is a real relief. I am very glad. The recent Saabs that Gemini have been putting out have often had these enormous off-roader style tractor tyres on the nose gear. This one looks like it has a better tyre size, so it's looking pretty good. I'm not entirely certain about some of the print work, but I'm going to be getting this model, so it's likely to get a review at the site, so I'll get a closer look at it at the time, but I'm happy enough with that one staying where it is as well. Now, I should also point out that, and everyone knows this, that even though these are quite nice release photos that Gemini produce, the angle of the image is just shocking for working out the quality of the model. It almost actively hides a lot of the detail, and often models look great in these pictures, and then you see them from the side and you go, blimey, what the hell is that? Because they've got issues with the undercarriage, and it would be much better if they release photos that were similar to the sort of the JC Wings and NG are producing, where you get multiple pictures from different angles and you can get a much clearer view of the model rather than just looking at it from this top-down kind of view. Anyway, next up, we've got the Air India A350. Yeah, it looks good as well. I really like the scheme. I've talked about it before. Can't see any major issues with the model, and I think that's quite happy to sit that in the high flyer still, and the flaps down one can stay where it is as well. Moving to the ITA Airways. Again, no major issues. Looks like they've actually kind of resolved some of the wing fit issues with the Neo mold, so it's competing quite nicely. I've generally quite liked it. I would like to see this one from the side though. This is one of those where the picture doesn't probably tell the whole story and it's a little bit hard to tell how good the model looks. Would like to see some side images, but for now, quite happy to keep that where it is as well. And similarly with the Mexican Police 727, this one correctly has husk kits on it, unlike some, or at least one of the releases that they've made which didn't. Again, I'm not entirely certain about the print here down the front. I would like to see this model from the side. You just can't quite tell. Some of their 727s have looked not great in recent times. So I reserve judgment, but for now I can stay in high flyer until I see side images. On to the less impressive models, and the Delta SkyTeam 767-400 looks kind of as I would expect it to do. I.e., it looks fine within the limitations of the mould, which are serious in my opinion. All the engine pylons, the undercarriage, it's just an old-fashioned mould, badly updated really, and I think that I wouldn't be buying this because you've got alternatives from Panda and NG which are much better. So wait until you get a SkyTeam Delta from them. I would if I were you. And the last one of the lower ranked models here is the S7 A319, and this looks just as bad as I feared. The engines do look vast even from this angle. The cockpit looks weird. I get the feeling this was made quite a long time ago because I've seen better looking Neos from Gemini, and even the angle of the Gemini photo can't hide its failings. So no movement on any of those models, but you'll notice that there are two models which I have not talked about at all so far, and these are the two that have kind of disturbed me into making this video because it really illustrates that you've got to be careful and why pre-ordering is problematic. So first up, we've got a Lufthansa 747, and I sang the praises of this release so much that I put it up into supersonic, but I was assuming that it was going to be on the new JC Wings Gemini mould, the nice seamless mould, which is of modern standards, has got all the sort of modern features and proper detailing that you would expect from a 747-400. But lo and behold, when you see the picture, the first thing that stands out to you is that this is not that mould. This is the old seamed Gemini mould. Now this mould dates from pretty much the beginning of 400 scale. I think it first was released in 1999 and it is showing its age. Now it's not atrocious, but it is pretty atrocious for being released in 2024. It's got a series of elements of it that, even though it's been updated with aerials and rolling gear and it's got some nice printing, you can't really hide. It's got, if we have a look through those issues, at the tail vertical stabilizer just sits as one whole unit slotted into the fuselage. There's no space for the rudder to be free, which you would see on any newer mold. It's got this huge seam line at the wing root because it is a cradle mount mold. The wings do not slut in from the side. It is a cradle mount. The engine pylon connection to the wing is really old-fashioned, got this very square join. And the engines themselves, the fans, obviously that detailing is quite old as well because it's a very old mold. Now I've got quite a few of these 747s, but I would really question buying any of this mold in the year 2024. It seems bizarre. And I thought that this mold was long gone. The last time it was used by Gemini, I think, was 2021. And I assumed that they'd got rid of all the stuff sitting in their warehouse. Because the only reason this model has been released is because it's been sitting around for years. This is the way Gemini works. They produce models, they leave them in the warehouse, and then they release them, trickle them out over the years. And that can be a real problem when you get this kind of thing, because this mold is so obsolescent now. it seems bizarre to be releasing it in 2024. I think they can almost get away with it because, let's face it, there's not a lot of competition from 747-400s except from their own mould at the moment, the good version of the mould. There is also the Big Bird Mark III floating around, but it doesn't get almost any usage. Both those moulds are substantially superior to this one. It really does, in my opinion, damage the viability of this release. And yeah, it's disappointing, to be honest. And I guess when you see Gemini release sets now, if you don't see flaps up and flaps down for a 747, then you really need to be paying attention to what mold they're using. So I'm going to move this one down. This is no longer a supersonic model by any stretch of the imagination. I'm putting this one down to workhorse. This is a model which probably shouldn't be being released in 2024, to be honest. I know they've had it sitting around the warehouse and just haven't got round to it, but it's rubbish. So, moving on, I think we've got something which is even worse, because you can kind of get away with 747-400 because there isn't much competition in the space. But then, the Air France 777-300ER, I can't think of many molds that are more competitive than a 777-300. And yet their Air France 777-300 is, again, when you look at it, on this incredibly old, updated, seamed mould. And again, this hasn't been used for a couple of years, since 2022. I thought we'd seen the last of this. Gemini JC have a vastly superior unseamed 777, which is one of the best. And the mould I assumed that they were going to be using for this release. Once again, I guess, if you're not seeing flaps down variant 2, you've got to be questioning which mould they're going to use. This has the same sort of issues that the 747-400 has. There's no free rudder at the tail, the engine detailing is poor, the wing pylon join is bad, and it's got this gigantic seam as well. It's a really poor mould, and one that I've even stopped including in detailed rankings because I thought it was gone. If you get away with releasing 747s just about, I don't think you can get away with releasing 777s on this mold. There's so much competition. I mean, Phoenix have been using a seamless 777 since before 2010, let's be honest. So how can, like 15, 16 years later, Gemini still think that it's sensible or a good idea to release on this mold? I don't understand it at all. Except that they don't seem to really care what you think. I'm going to move this one down to Gas Guzzler. It's a really disappointing release. So that is a very quick look, I guess, at my view on how looking at the actual photographs impacts the rankings I made beforehand. I am really disappointed to be seeing them producing these models. As I say, it is, or at least these two seamed mold models, it is a reflection of the way they produce models, that they produce them and they store them for a long time. But I also kind of, in a sense, and this is perhaps harsh, but I feel like it talks to some of the arrogance that I feel comes from Gemini. They think that nobody notices and they can do whatever they want and no one's going to care. And people will buy it anyway. And frankly, I do see some people going, it doesn't matter what it looks like, I'll still buy it. I think that's a bad attitude for the hobby because it means it's unlikely that things will ever improve. So, it's disappointing. And perhaps I'm being harsh on Gemini here, but in 2024, these molds should not be being used. And you wouldn't see JC Wings using molds like this for these types. They do still release Big Bird 747 mold, but that mold is a classic and people generally like it. It's certainly much better than the Gemini 744. I don't know. It's not a great look in my opinion, but it is a decision that they have made. And take from that what you will. What is interesting, and the juxtaposition here I think is quite enlightening, is that NG Models recently announced this NG Lite 747, and part of the reason they did that was because they weren't happy with the mold that they produced, and so they're thinking, well, we shouldn't release this as a standard release because it's not quite up to our standards. It's still decent, but it's not up to our standards, so we'll produce it as a light model. But Gemini, just, they're just going to put this stuff out regardless. NG's Lite 747 is retailing substantially cheaper than a standard NG release, whereas Gemini are producing these kind of models which could easily come from 2010, and they're just going to put them out at full price and hope no one notices. That's the difference between these brands in a nutshell. One is caring about the way it looks, to customers. He's caring about what the customers think. He's caring about the products that it is putting out. And the other one, not so much. Now, there are some good releases here, definitely. As I say, I'm going to get the Eastern Metro, so it's not all bad, certainly. There are some damn fine models here. But at the same time, these two, big disappointment and talk very much to my feelings about the way Gemini operate. The Delta 767 is similar, and the S7 A320. They both, to varying degrees, show that same issue as well. So you just got to be careful, I guess. And this is one of the reasons why I don't think pre-ordering makes sense unless you've seen pictures of the actual model release. Anyway, that's my view on this. Thanks very much for listening, guys. And I will see you next time, probably for the NG release announcement video, which I still haven't done. But until then, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.